Thank you, and it's great to see you all here this afternoon to hear about the Paradoxical Prime Minister, my new book, then to engage briefly in a dialogue on stage and to take your own questions. So I look forward to your thoughts. Very simply, the book is a description of Mr. Narendra Modi to begin with. The first 70-odd pages of the book are kind of an extended profile from what I've been able to glean of his life. And the rest of it is a pretty substantiated and substantial takedown of what has happened to India in the 4.5 years since he ascended to power as our Prime Minister. And so the subtitle of the book is Narendra Modi and His India, and it's about India as well. Now, some of you may say, well, you're a Congress MP, it's just going to be a hatchet job. But that's precisely why it's a fairly fat book, because I do have my credibility as an analyst and as a writer to defend. And so I do go into matters in some depth. The book is littered with footnotes in case anyone wants to challenge any of my facts or references. And it is divided into sections. After this big profile section at the beginning, there's a section called the Modification of India, which attempts to describe some of the changes that have sought to be wrought in the very nature and character of our country, our society, our politics, particularly the rise of bizarre phenomena like cow vigilantism. It may be striking to some of you to realize, for example, that of all the violence associated with cow protection in the entire history of independent India, 71 years, 97% of the episodes have occurred in the last 4 years under Narendra Modi's watch. And these are not my numbers, these are numbers from Mr. Modi's own Ministry of Home Affairs. So the one section on the modification of India, there's another section on government and governance, because after all, we were told during the election campaign that it's going to be about Mr. Modi giving us minimum government and maximum governance. We've ended up with the opposite. We've ended up, I'm sorry to say, with the most centralized and dominant Prime Minister's office since the emergency, in which every decision has to be taken at the very top, and where formerly effective ministries have been disempowered by having everything, including matters as routine as the filling of vacancies, having to be referred to the PMO. There's a section on economics. Now, like most people, I don't find economics particularly readable, so I've tried to compensate for that by writing about economics as readably as I can. And if I may be so immodest, I would particularly commend a fairly lengthy essay on the demonetization disaster, because I've tried to make the issues as accessible as possible to ordinary readers who may not have had a taste for economics in their college days. And then the final section is on foreign policy, because there is this mistaken impression that all these wonderful photographs we see from around the world of Mr. Modi jet-setting around and embracing world leaders in a somewhat unexpected bear hug, unexpected by the recipient, that this somehow reflects a major new triumph of Indian foreign policy, whereas any of you who actually picks up a foreign newspaper or finds one online will know that India's press in the world has never been worse. It actually is a time when our standing across the globe has gone down colossally, not least because of domestic developments here, as well as the quality of our relationships with our neighbors and other major countries. So these are what I've tried to do in the major sections of the book. How have I tried to do it? I thought I might share with you an excerpt initially from the opening section where I talk about Mr. Modi's rise. Just a couple of pages just to give you a flavor of how I've tried to approach the theme. This particular section is about Mr. Modi in 2012-13, during the period when his image was being reshaped to appeal to India as a future prime ministerial candidate. And here are a couple of pages from that part of the book. After Narendra Modi was again re-elected Chief Minister in 2007, his nationwide projection gathered pace. And it intensified with his third election victory in Gujarat in 2012, which clinched his reputation as the BJP's most successful national figure. A key part of his public appeal was his decision to bypass the mainstream media, which he felt had been unfair to him in and since 2002, in favor of reaching out directly to the public on social media. His Twitter account became a key vehicle of his messaging. In the interest of full disclosure, I should say with due immodesty that I had anticipated him in this regard, but he eclipsed me on the 4th of July 2013 as the country's most followed politician on Twitter and multiplied his lead several times soon thereafter. He is now the third most followed current world leader on Twitter after US President Donald Trump and Pope Francis, with over 43 million followers. In addition to his Twitter page, Narendra Modi, or perhaps more accurately, his personal social media cell, ran a Facebook page, a YouTube channel, a LinkedIn account, and also posted widely on other social media, including, when they became popular, Pinterest, Instagram, and Tumblr. Notice I didn't say Tinder. Both through his choice of medium and the nature of his posts on these social media services, Mr. Modi projected a compelling picture of himself to the world. His photographs showed a modern, hands-on man of action, laptop at the ready, financial newspaper in hand, or wielding a DSLR camera. Other images portrayed a cosmopolitan sophisticate. There was Mr. Modi reading an Obama biography, Mr. Modi in a tracksuit, Mr. Modi sporting a cowboy hat. These social media images were a vital part of a larger branding exercise designed to achieve the visual reimagining of Narendra Modi. The photographs sought to portray a man who was both not what people assumed he was and was something people thought he might not be. The first message was that he was not the typical socialist politician, clad hypocritically in khadi, whom the Indian public had seen too many of over the years. And equally, that he was not the khaki shorts-wearing, lathi-wielding RSS pracharak with antediluvian ideas about modern society and economics. Instead, the new brand image showed Narendra Modi as a man who comfortably occupied two spaces, that of Hindu values and traditions embodied in his ideology and politics, but also that of globalized modernity, reflected in his activities as the progressive-minded CEO of Gujarat Inc. Narendra Modi had, from childhood, a taste for different ways of doing things and saw himself as a man of innovation. This self-image was what the pictures sought to project to the wider world. The pictures spoke of a figure not associated in the public mind with the RSS, a modern man adept at using the latest communications technology, at home with international economic thought and with titans of global business. Mr. Modi wished to convey that he had a globalized vision for the nation, unlike most of the members of his old organization, the RSS, who were associated with the nativist and protectionist ideas advocated by that body's Swadeshi Jagran Manch. As Mr. Modi declared in an address to the Shri Ram College of Commerce in Delhi in 2007, in a metaphor he was to use 7 years later as PM in a memorable address in Madison Square Garden, Indians in the past had been known as snake charmers, but Indian youth in the future were moving from the snake to charming the mouse, the latter, of course, attached to a computer. This reinvention of the right-wing project by Narendra Modi and its propagation by social media did a number of things at once. It challenged the conventional wisdom about his and the RSS's politics and economics. It associated him with a willingness to learn and profit from the West, whereas the RSS had traditionally been seen as resistant to the West and globalization. It identified him with young India's aspirations for modernity. In the process, it allowed Narendra Modi to change the public perception of the party he sought to lead. It helped, of course, that much of his target audience were young people, first-time voters, Facebook and Twitter users, hailing from a generation that had grown up with little memory of the 2002 riots. It's a startling fact that half of India's population is under 25. And so the oldest of the youths voting for the first time in the 2019 elections would have been barely 6 years old when that tragedy occurred. Many had seen the BJP as a political vehicle for old men speaking in Hindi about the glories of Hindu culture, preferably while wearing saffron and sandalwood paste on their foreheads. Instead, here was a new standard bearer, a smartly attired modern man who could click a mouse with one hand while brandishing a trishul with the other. So I'll stop there, but that gives you a sense of the flavor of the writing and of the analysis. And there's, in this essay, there's a rather extensive discussion of the idea of Moditva, which is that as somebody who's grown up entirely in the RSS, in fact, Mr. Modi published a book of his 16 greatest heroes, and every single one of them was a male RSS pracharak. So the man's mind has clearly been conditioned by a lifetime spent in that organization. And yet, politically, what he represents is a sort of Hindutva plus. And I try and analyze in the book what the elements are that go into Moditva, the hyper-aggressive masculinity of the 56 ki chhati, the image portrayal of a certain jingoistic militarism, tough guy talk, and the outsized personality cult, which is actually quite unusual for somebody from the RSS. But I'll leave you to read that in the book. And I've talked about many things, including the attack on science that we've seen coming out of the ruling party. The attack on rationality is very much part of the ruling ideology. And it's quite startling because it actually undermines, in many ways, it undermines the positive message that could have been brought out of our ancient past. I mean, to give you one example, the Prime Minister, at the opening of a hospital during his first year in office, you may remember this because it happened in Mumbai as well. He said that Ganesh, that Lord Ganesha's head on an elephant's, on a human body, was evidence of India being world masters of plastic surgery. Now, it gobsmacked many of us for two reasons. The first is, of course, the fatuousness of the pronouncement, because obviously the smallest imaginable elephant head cannot by any stretch of the imagination fit on the largest imaginable human neck. And so you know that the one really had nothing to do with the other in a technical medical sense of the term. But the second reason it dismayed people like me is that it undermined the actual fact that India was the world's leader in plastic surgery, that the oldest known plastic surgery conducted on this planet was done in India in the 1st century AD by Shushruta. It was a rhinoplasty, a nasal reconstruction, and details of the operation have survived, as have some of the instruments. Now, if you're a Hindu chauvinist, that's what you should be talking about. Instead, you talk about Ganesha's head, because yours is not, sadly, an informed Hindu chauvinism. It is a conflation of absurd ideas like jet engines having been invented in the Vedic years for Pushpak Vimans to hurtle around space. I mean, and in the process, the genuine accomplishments of our forebears, which were considerable, are lost in the process. And so the assault on science today is very much emerging from that same ethos of thought that Mr. Modi, in his own statements, has reflected. And I find it very deeply dismaying, because we are the country that once upon a time invented the concept of the zero, a major advance in global mathematics. Today, it seems that all we invent is zero. And that is something that I blame the kind of retrograde thinking that we are seeing from our Prime Minister on down the ruling party. So it's not just political analysis in the book. I go into all of this. I cite other voices from the ruling dispensation as well. And I hope that you will enjoy all of that. On governance, I go into everything from, in particular, because it's so relevant this year, the Modi government's attack on institutions. One of the great strengths, in fact, it's not entirely coincidental that my previous publishers, Penguin, have brought out a new edition of my 2003 biography of Nehru, Nehru, the Invention of India, because in many ways, Nehru represented the antithesis of what Narendra Modi represents, including in things like his respect for science, and indeed on matters like his respect for institutions. So when Nehru was Prime Minister, he was unchallengeable far more so than Mr. Modi. Mahatma Gandhi, as you know, was assassinated in 1948. Sardar Patel died in 1950. For most of Nehru's rule, there was nobody who came anywhere close to his stature. And he could have got his way. He could have done what so many other post-independence heroes in other colonial lands, from Nkrumah in Ghana to Nyerere in Tanzania, Kaunda in Zambia, there's so many examples, had done, which was to essentially say that you needed authority to be able to weld together a fractious nation, promote unity and direct development. But Nehru never succumbed to that temptation. He consistently stood up for building up democratic institutions. When crossed, his instinct was to offer his resignation rather than to insist on having his way. And of course, it was another matter that the cabinet came begging, saying, no, we won't disagree with you, please continue, because he was so indispensable. But it was the instinct of a Democrat. The way he paid respect to Parliament, where he would actually insist that his cabinet members attended, that he personally attended every session, that he gave an importance out of all proportion to the very modest size of the opposition in those days. And you compare that with Mr. Modi's disregard for Parliament, which he convenes for just a quarter of the days that Nehruji used to convene his Parliament, and doesn't bother to attend most of the time. He's hardly ever there, and he has made more speeches in foreign parliaments than he has in the Lok Sabha, of which he's a member. And now we have seen in the course of Mr. Modi's rule a disrespect for the very institutions Nehru tried to build up. I mean, this year began with the shock press conference by 4 Supreme Court judges. It's striking to realize that Nehruji, who was a man of often short temper, once at a podium said something disrespectful about a judge. Before the day had ended, he had written a craven letter of apology to the judge in question, and then an even more groveling letter to the Chief Justice of India, apologizing for having insulted the judiciary. Now, why did he do that? He didn't need to do that. He was Nehru. No judge would have dared to cross him. But he felt the nation needed to know that he was not above the institution of the judiciary, far from it, that he owed a duty to it as a political figure to respect the institution. That was Nehru, and compare that to what's happening. Now compare that to what's happened to our election commission, whose independence has been called into question by the unexpected decision to grant Gujarat 12 days more for the government to hand out freebies before the elections there, even though on the 3 previous occasions, the Gujarat election dates have been announced on the same day as the Uttarakhand election dates. Why did that happen? No explanation. Look at the Central Information Commission, where 88% of the posts across the country of information commissioners have been deliberately left vacant, so that right to information applications will just pile up and become pending, and the institution will get hollowed out. Look at the Lokpal, created with much fanfare and BJP pressure. 4.5 years into a BJP government, no Lokpal has yet been appointed. Look at every institution you can get a name. Dare I say, even look at the CBI, where we have a kind of bizarre Keystone Cops movie going on, like those 1920s movies with people moving faster than the normal speed of human movement. And number 1 is going after number 2, and number 2 is going after number 1, and the government is coming in and hitting them both on the head. It's quite astonishing what's happened to the institution so respected that in the past, state chief ministers and state chief justices, even in states ruled by opposition parties, would often refer cases to the CBI for fear that in the state true justice might not be done or a fair investigation might not happen because of local passions. Now, what's happened to that institution? So you look at all of these things and you say, my gosh, what's happening to our institutions? And there's an essay on that. What's happening to our education system with the fortunately pathetic and fitful attempts at saffronization, all of these issues, even the creation of a problem that successive governments, including the previous BJP government of Mr. Vajpayee, had pushed under the carpet or shoved on the back burner, the incipient north-south divide that might happen if the skewed demographics of our nation were reflected in government policies, government subventions, and electoral seats. Even there, the Modi government, with its emphasis on Hindi, Hindu, Hindutva as the identity of Hindustan, has blundered into that. So I've got all of this. I'm going to end so we can have enough time for a reasonable discussion, first with my interrogator sitting in the audience and then with all of you. I'll end with a few lines from the very last section of the book, because there's no point writing a book that's purely negative. And this book, inevitably, because of all of the things I've described to you and many more, has taken on a fairly negative coloration. So in the final few pages, this is what I say. So what should be the animating idea of our new India? I've taken apart Mr. Modi's rhetorical affirmation of working towards a new India, and that is earlier, you'll have to read it in the book. But then I say, so what should be the animating idea of our new India? It's an idea of one nation made up of many different kinds of people. An India where it does not matter what religion you practice, what language you speak, what caste you were born into, what color your skin is. In our new India, it should only matter that you are Indian. Our new India must be an India that respects all religions, all faiths, all beliefs, all cultures, all languages, all regions, all castes, and all classes. That idea of India is under threat today from those who seek not just to rule India, but to change India's very heart and soul. What we want in India is unity. They want uniformity. We believe in an India that unites our people. They seek to divide us. Our ideology binds our people together. Theirs separates one Indian from another. What we need in New India is a strengthening of democratic institutions at all levels, with transparency and accountability enforced through the Right to Information Act and an active parliament. They seek to weaken those institutions, to hollow out RTI, to disregard parliament, and to promote one-man rule. What we require in our new India is a leadership that empowers people and harnesses their collective strength in the pursuit of national objectives, not someone who sees people as instruments of his own power. Our new India must derive its support and strength from all sections of our diverse society. Their new India speaks of one faith and reduces others to second-class status. Their idea of new India is one of exhortation. Make in India, digital India, start-up India, stand-up India, sit-down India. Our new India must be one of consultation. We must never speak of India shining without asking who India is shining for. Our new India must follow policies that both promote higher economic growth and also ensures that the benefits of our growth are enjoyed by the poor and disadvantaged sections of our society. The choice is clear. We can have a new India that belongs to all of us, led by a government that works for all of us. Or we can have a new India that belongs to some and serves the interests of a few. You can choose a new India that embodies hope or one that promotes fear. You can support a new India united in striving or an India divided by hatred. I believe we can look forward to a new India with confidence, if not with optimism. But we must build this new India on solutions to our major challenges. We have to overcome our poverty. We have to deal with the hardware of development, the ports, the roads, the airports, all the infrastructural progress we need to make, and the software of development, the human capital, The need for the ordinary person in India to be able to have a couple of square meals a day, to be able to send his or her children to a decent school, and to aspire to work a job that will give them opportunities in their lives to transform themselves. We have to tackle and end corruption. We need to conquer these challenges, real challenges which none of us in India can pretend don't exist. But it must take place in an open society, in a rich and diverse and plural civilization, one that is open to the contention of ideas and interests within it, unafraid of the prowess or the products of the outside world, wedded to the democratic pluralism that is India's greatest strength, and determined to liberate and fulfill the creative energies of its people. We must remain faithful to our founding values of the 20th century if we are to conquer the challenges of the 21st and build a new India that we seek. Our new India will shine, but it must shine for all. Thank you very much. Bachi Karkaria is bravely pinch hitting for Cyrus Broacha, who apparently is stuck in Malabar Hill and knows he won't get here in time.
Yes, I'm sorry. It's due to a bit of a mix-up on our part. Lots of glitches and glotches happen in politics. So sometimes I think Litfest can be forgiven a few. Now, Shashi, you said one of your books is Why I Am a Hindu. I obviously cannot write why I am not a Hindu, at least not in the present dispensation. But I think I might tell the audience why I am not Cyrus. So I'll try my best to put myself into his very large shoes and his, I think, larger than chappan chhati, and try and interrogate you.
Don't make comments about his waistline, that wouldn't be fair.
All right.
Chappan inch seems a bit exaggerated, like the original.
Right. You think he pads up his chest, or is it all the puffing up? That's Modi, not Cyrus.
No, apparently, when he was invited to address a university convocation, the university wanted to present him with an achkan. So they asked for his measurements. And apparently they were told to make the achkan at a 50-inch chest.
Oh, I see.
So slight exaggeration, 10%.
Or is
you have
this
to allow the Prime Minister that.
Or
I mean, by comparison with what he said at Davos, when he said, speaking to you on behalf of 600 crore voters who voted for me, and our country has only 120 crore people, and only 17 crore of them voted for his party. So where the 600 crore, that's much worse than chappan inch ki chhati.
All right. So this is the Congress cutting him down to size. Okay. Now, you know, Shashi, a lot of people keep talking about your vocabulary. And we whose job
Is paradoxical such a difficult word?
We whose job it is to dabble in words, you'll get a terrible complex about it. And you spoke about this present dispensation, which is now minimum governance and maximum government. So will we have the next book from you which says minimum syllables and maximum meaning? You're supposed to answer that question.
Oh, I'll give you a word of just 2 syllables, pointed, which is what your question was. Look, the long words have become a bit of a joke. To be honest, I'll be honest and say that when I tweeted about a farrago of misrepresentations and so on, I actually was angry. And I didn't realize the word was so unknown because I've been using it since my debates at St. Stephen's College, going back.
And your
40 years.
Calcutta background.
Beg your pardon?
And your Calcutta background, which must have told you lots of pompous words.
Calcutta, St. Stephen's, you name it. But the fact is that once people began talking about vocabulary and how there was a record spike in people, the Oxford English Dictionary tweeted that they'd never had so many searches in one day for one word.
Okay.
So, I mean, I was, after that, then it became a bit of a joke. And in fact, when this book was to be launched, if I had just said, we're releasing today a book called The Paradoxical Prime Minister, it wouldn't have got half as much attention as it got when I actually tweeted, the paradoxical Prime Minister is more than just a 500-page exercise in fluxi nosi nihilipilification. So that was clearly meant to be tongue-in-cheek. I was poking fun of myself as well. And that word simply means the act of estimating as worthless. And one of those things you learned in high school in the 60s. But where you lived in the pre-internet era, where words were really a genuine form of entertainment as well as education.
Okay, thank you. You spoke a lot, and we all know the power of Mr. Modi's social media presence. We as journalists, or anyone who isn't a Modi devotee, and is in fact a Modi detractor, we suffer the wrath of trolls as well. But you are also very much on Twitter and very much on social media. And it's come really to the point where we now have government by Twitter. And when Descartes said, I think, therefore I am, and I think the present day context, it's I tweet, therefore I am. Yeah, truly, because the way everybody jumps into it. So, but Twitter, which was a wonderful way of democratizing the news process, or it really kind of helped everybody to be a journalist. It wasn't a very good thing because you had power without responsibility. But the point is that now Twitter and social media has just become this whole big vehicle for fake news. So, would you say, and now we've had this big statue business, so would you say that Satyameva Jayate has been replaced by Statue-meva Jayate?
Gosh, there are a lot of questions in that one. On Twitter and social media, you're right. It was a way of democratizing the news. I'm proud to have been a pioneer. I gave an interview, I remember, in 2009, October, in which I was being upbraided by the journalist in her questions because at that point the mainstream media was not happy that a politician was bypassing them and going straight to the public. And I must say that at that point, even the political class was by then conscious of the controversies that were being whipped up on every second word I used, mainly by a hostile media that resented this bypassing of them to go direct to the public. And I remember Mr. Venkaiah Naidu, then the president of the BJP, saying, too much tweeting will lead to quitting, which turned out to be very prescient, in fact. And we also had others saying more soberly, perhaps, that any medium that calls itself Twitter can't be a serious medium for a politician. At that point, I was even a minister. To which my answer was that if you really think about it, Yahoo and Google don't sound particularly serious either, but everybody's using them. And I said it won't be, I said within 10 years, I said, every serious politician in India will be on Twitter. Now, I didn't have to wait 10 years. Within less than 5, that was true. And it was true partially because the opposition, at that point the BJP and the Hindutva right, felt that they were not getting enough traction on mainstream media, so social media would give them an outlet to shape their own narrative. And they embraced it with a vengeance. As I said from the podium, Mr. Modi overtook me in July of 2013. And when he became Prime Minister, he decreed that every minister would have to open a Twitter account. And that was a way of conveying a message that this is an important media. Meanwhile, all of you journalists have also embraced it, and you've climbed onto it. But the problem with what happened with the BJP's embrace of this media was the advent of the trolls. Last year when Twitter did a cleanup of these automated bots that just attack people, I lost 200,000 followers because the BJP had created 200,000 fake accounts just to follow me, to attack me, by repeating the same negative message in different ways. And that's something which, from Swati Chaturvedi's book, I Am a Troll, you know all about how the BJP has organized its social media cells. And the frustration with that is it's made social media, on the one hand, indispensable, on the other hand, less useful because it's no longer a genuine reflection anymore of what people really think. And especially as long as Twitter permits anonymous and fake accounts. And if you can open one account as Bachi Karkaria, another one as Alex Smart, and God knows 10 others, including one as Cyrus Broacha Jr. or as Mrs. Cyrus Broacha, who knows. She can then express 5 different opinions, or even express her own opinion 5 times. Or if you suddenly see a flurry of tweets saying, what a great column Bachi Karkaria wrote today in the Times of India, and they've all come from these handles with eggs for their picture,
actually,
then you know she's learned from the BJP.
Now I must say why I am not a bot, and we'll have to sort of have that capture thing on it.
But to answer your second part of your question about statues and so on, I think it's really, really, to my mind, embarrassing. First of all, it's a mistaken sense of priorities. Because if you were essentially doing it by subscription, if people were voluntarily contributing, as in the old days, for a statue for somebody they adored, no one can object. But when you're spending taxpayers' money, you are making a choice. You're saying, I'm going to spend 3,000 crores to build a statue rather than to build 10 hospitals or 20 schools or do X, Y, Z other programs. So there is a choice. Then you make the very specious argument that the statue will eventually pay for itself in tourists. But you park it in a place where if you take the elevator up to Sardar Patel's chest and look around, all you can see is barren, dusty fields, no human habitation, no interesting buildings, a few trickles of water, and that's about it. How many people are going to want to do that too often? Will the economics of the statue actually pay for itself? I'm profoundly skeptical. And now, of course, you've got more statues coming up. You've got a Shivaji statue here, a Ram statue there, possibly a Sita statue will follow. And at the end...
And who will be taller than the other? I mean, how can Ram be shorter than a mere mortal?
That's right, so he'll be even
So
taller
poor
than Sardar
Sardar
Patel.
Patel, I mean, he'll be cut to size again.
Exactly. So, they wanted to, instead of mandir wahi banayenge, they'll soon be saying statue wahi banayenge in Ayodhya.
Yes.
So this kind of stuff, to be honest, is the politics of the empty gesture, which to my mind is actually a sad commentary on the state of where our political evolution has taken us. This and the renaming of towns, which I objected to when it wasn't particularly political. I objected to it in my book, India from Midnight to the Millennium, more than 20 years ago. But now when it's only Muslim names of towns that are being changed to allegedly more authentic Hindu names, I am furious because it sends exactly the wrong signal to 16% of our population, that somehow you have less claim on this land than Hindus do, that you have less stake. I mean, if you want a recipe for political stupidity and for alienating a section of the population that has been remarkably loyal to India despite many challenges and many tough times, I think you can't think of a more stupid thing that could be done than this business of conveying such a message.
In fact, Shashi, yesterday we filled a hall as large as this with a session which said Muslim equals terrorist, ? And what are we doing to break the stereotypes in which we've caged our brethren? And it really is something very serious to think about. Now, I want to ask you a question which...
On that, if I can add one more detail. We have a population of about 180, 190 million Muslims. According to our own intelligence, Narendra Modi's BJP government's intelligence, no more than 102 have ever joined Al-Qaeda, ISIS, any of these terrorist groups. Okay, you can't even calculate the percentage of 1.3 billion that represents. Now, Pakistan has slightly more Muslims than us, maybe 200 million. They've had tens of thousands of people going in for terrorism. So we've actually done something right. A government that claims to be hostile to Pakistan and claims India is a better model, instead of learning the right lesson, is busy trying to demonize minorities, discriminate against people of the Muslim faith, now send them the signal of unwelcomeness through the renaming of towns. What are they doing? Are they wanting to create a problem that hasn't existed so far?
Well, that seems to be the way that it's going, because this whole big mandir issue that has come up, the very fact that, people who said the other day that India should have gone the Hindu way rather than the secular way. And you spoke about Pandit Nehru, and that's really very true, because, Pandit Nehru's idea of India is being so determinedly smashed. Now, and you spoke of Nehru, and I would really like to also ask you seriously that, non-alignment, which used to be, very much the pillar of the Indian state, now we've got extremely selective alignment that's happening. Now, what would you really first change? Should after 2019, what would you turn the clock back on after 2019 if you did come back to power?
Oh, I think that's not really an if anymore. I think it's very, very clear that it's more a when. But we are actually working on a very serious manifesto to put before the nation. We're conducting consultations everywhere. I myself have done consultations in Mumbai on art, literature, and culture. What should we be doing to protect and promote theatre, film, all of these activities. I have introduced a private members bill that will essentially abolish the censoring powers of the censor board. There's a number of things we ought to be doing to take this country in the direction it was intended to evolve into, but hasn't actually, has been set back in the last 4.5 years. When that manifesto comes out, I expect that some of the things in it will be, for example, a strengthening of institutions and methods to ensure their integrity and impartiality, rather than letting them be vulnerable to the government of the day. I think there will definitely have to be steps to empower the ministries and to give the whole notion of collective cabinet responsibility, on which the parliamentary system supposedly rests, some real content, rather than merely doing it in the way in which this government has been functioning. I believe we are definitely going to put a moratorium on some of the nonsensical initiatives of the government, like demonetization. We would want to simplify and streamline
Rahul has already gone on the
GST.
great big Hindu temple tour. So will he, step back
No, but
from
going
that?
to a Hindu temple is not in and of itself a negative thing, provided your understanding of the faith that you are publicly avowing is an inclusive understanding. As my book, Why I'm a Hindu, has tried to explain, Hindutva has nothing to do with Hinduism. Hindutva is a political doctrine that is fundamentally violative of the basic precepts and tenets of the Hindu faith. As most Hindus have grown up with it, lived with it, practiced it, learned about it, learned from the great thinkers and teachers, the Mahatmas of the faith, from Adi Shankara to Swami Vivekananda, right up to Mahatma Gandhi, we have a notion of what the Hindu faith is all about. And it is emphatically not what the proponents of the Hindutva movement claim is authentic Hinduism. So I think when Rahul Gandhi says that he's proud of being a Hindu, he means something very different from when Togadia or Ashok Singhal or even
but at
Narendra
the
Modi
moment, it's really as if he's projecting himself almost as the poor man's, Hindu Modi.
as
And
a liberal man's Hindu.
Well, we'll leave that now. But tell me, and I'm asking you this question only half in jest, what do you think Rahul Gandhi can learn from Mr. Modi's reign during these last 4 years?
I think one of the lessons that I believe he's already learned is that a country like India is not the right place for the hero on the white stallion charging down with upraised sword, saying, I know all the answers, I will solve all your problems, and threatening to cut through the Gordian knot. Because in fact, the country is far more complex than that. I think this is a country for somebody without heroic pretensions, who comes on foot, who says to people, look, I don't know all the answers, but I'd like to know what you think are your questions, what your problems are, and I will come accompanied by a deep and experienced bench of qualified and able people who will work with me and work with you to deal with your problems and solve them. That, I think, is the answer.
I'm going to leave, the audience has a lot of questions, so I'm going to just end with a slightly light note, or maybe two light notes. One is that, Mr. Modi's monogram suit was, I think, really the sartorial equivalent of the selfie. And if you're not a person who shies away from ego, so if someone were to give you a monogram suit, would you wear it?
I would probably wear it very mockingly because somebody had given it to me. But I think that for the Prime Minister to do so, and to do so on an occasion with a visiting president, was an embarrassingly bad taste. So I would have to find a suitably light-hearted occasion to mock myself, rather than to do it with the kind of vainglory that was associated with the Prime Minister's choice of that garment.
Okay, the last question. Since you make no pretense of brahmacharya, yes, and you said that Mr. Modi is not on Tinder, may I ask if you are?
I can't even say been there, done that. Never done that. Never done that. Never been randomly out there. Never picked up anybody in a bar. I mean, none of those things. Sometimes, unfortunately, the image is not the person. But there we are.
Right. Okay. All right. So now, Shashi, you take the question. I've done my bit.
I think you have to play traffic cop now and pick the questioners.
Who shall we start with? Riya Suketu. Suketu.
I believe there's a mic going around, or more than one, no? Yeah.
share with us what you understand to be Modi's vision of India.
Well, you know, it's interesting because the title, The Paradoxical Prime Minister, refers to my grappling with this very issue. In 2014, I published a book which didn't do terribly well, so it's still out there if you want it. It's called India Shastra, Reflections on Contemporary India, something like that. India Shastra was the title of the book. And in that, it was a collection of pieces of the preceding 7-8 years that I'd published on various issues to deal with India. But it also took into account the first 6 months of Narendra Modi's era, in which, as many of you may remember, I had been quite prepared to take his words at face value and to give him the benefit of the doubt, something that got me into a whole lot of trouble with my party, even though I pointed out that what I was doing was showing respect for the verdict of the voters and thereby showing respect for Indian democracy and the Indian electorate. But secondly, I was also saying that if these are what Mr. Modi says are his visions of India, then these are now the yardsticks by which we can judge him. So when I praised Mr. Modi's conciliatory language, his inclusive language, Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas, I will be a prime minister for all Indians, the government has no business to be in business, minimum government, maximum governance, all of those things, I said, here is a man who's at least articulating a liberal, inclusive vision of India. But then, by the time I wrote India Shastra 6 months into his reign, I wrote the introduction to the collection, I said, I fear that the problem Mr. Modi has, the central contradiction in his rule, is that he says all these liberal things, but that he rests for political support on the most illiberal elements of Indian society. So you have the RSS pracharaks, without his support he can't win elections. You have all these troglodytes, the ones who are busy rewriting Indian history and reinventing Indian science, these characters. And if they're the ones he's going to rely upon, he's never been going to be able to fulfill this vision. And so I wrote a sentence saying, in this contradiction, in this fundamental contradiction, lies the seeds of Mr. Modi's future failure. This was published in December 2014. And so I begin this book 4 years later with the words, I told you so. And then I quote this paragraph, which is in black and white 4.5 years ago, and I say, listen, this is the problem, that he articulates a vision and he does exactly the opposite, maybe because he feels he doesn't have any choice and that's where his support base lies, or maybe that's where he really wants to be and the words are merely words. The gap between rhetoric and reality has never been greater in our country than with this paradoxical Prime Minister of ours.
Right at the back, yes. The girl there, yes. Give the mics faster.
Sir,
I asked.
M. Ali. Yesterday I attended the program of Mr. Kapil Sabbal. His manifesto was education and health. What should be in your view?
Well, I think education and health are absolutely fundamental. These are two areas in which clearly the government needs to give an enormous amount of emphasis. I've actually been surprised that the government has done so little to reform education. In fact, they had a golden opportunity to set up an education commission that incidentally could also have advanced their saffron agenda. They never did it. And I think they've actually let these 5 years go by in a way in which sadly has wasted the opportunities for reforming Indian education effectively. Health is another fundamental thing. It's shameful that there are 220 million Indians today who do not have a healthcare clinic or a primary health center within 5 kilometers walk of their places of residence. And where these places exist, by the way, very often they don't have enough medicine supplies, they don't have enough nurses, and they certainly don't have a doctor. So we need to completely fix this. And there are a number of things that need to be done, which the Congress Party will be advocating in its manifesto.
There was this girl at the back. Have you got your mic yet? Come on, stand up. And then the person who's been waving his or her paper over there, please take the mics so that we don't waste any more time.
Sir, in Germany, there was a lackadaisical government because of which Hitler was voted to power because he was seen as a savior. I think what's happened in India is similar. We voted for Narendra Modi because we saw him as a savior. But now, of course, it did not work out. So what do you think? How can we, as the Indian people, trust Congress or any other party to do what they have not been able to do in the past?
No, that's a very good question. Let me first address the fear of the parallel that you mentioned. I would say that India in the second decade of the 21st century is not Germany in the 1930s. And I think all of us will not stand for a new Hitler rising in this country. I believe that though my faith in the mainstream media has been shaken by its performance in the last 5 years, I was reminded of Mr. Advani's own famous line after the emergency that you were asked to bend and you chose to crawl. When you have articles exposing people close to the ruling dispensation disappearing overnight from the websites of mainstream publications, when you have editors being dismissed and others being transferred or removed from their positions because of unwelcome reporting, this kind of craven surrender to the agenda of the government of the day has been very disappointing. Nonetheless, what exists today in social media are a series of feisty, courageous, independent voices that may not be so easily suppressed. I mean, China needs 300,000 internet police to clamp down on all the free voices trying to rise there. In India, because we're a lot less efficient, I don't think they're going to be quite so good at curbing resistance to any future Hitlerian move. So I want to address the fear that lies behind your question, saying that's not going to happen. But on the political aspect of your question, I think it's very clear that those of us who were in power at the time that Mr. Modi rose to power have a lot to ask ourselves. There's a great need for very serious self-flagellation. What did we do wrong? What did we fail to do right? What did we take for granted that we shouldn't have? And I'm convinced that the next government will in any case be a broad-based government, because many who stayed out of UPA 2 or left it will feel a desire to be part of UPA 3, because there is now a very, very widespread sense that we cannot allow the BJP to continue and do to the nation for another 5 years what they have attempted with partial success only to do to the nation in these last 5 years. So stopping the BJP is important, but we also know that the only way that stoppage can effectively be prevented is by a positive agenda, hard work, and at the same time, work that represents all Indians. We really have to truly do Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas.
No, I'll just take one question. There's somebody who's been waving that paper. Do you have a mic? Do you have a mic there? I'm sorry, then you have a mic?
In the meantime, maybe we should, whoever has
Then
the mic.
yeah, whoever's got a mic.
I'm
Just
from the
keep
generation
laughing.
where there was that song,
He laughed,
if
he
you
was
can't
the
be with
best.
the one you love the one you're with. So if you can't get the mic to the one you picked,
Okay.
ask the person
So
who has
who's
the
got a
mic.
Okay, there he is. All right, I'm sorry.
Am I audible? Hello, sir. So you spoke a lot on transparency and RTI. Yesterday, Kapil sir spoke a lot about transparency. My question is around the transparency in the funding of political parties. Recently, a bill or a law was passed by the government, and it literally went unopposed. There was no narrative, there was no dialogue that happened around this. I would want to ask that this is a very fundamental thing that should have been opposed. A, why was it not opposed? And B, tomorrow if you come to, or as you said, when you come in 2019, would you eliminate this bill or law that literally eliminates the transparency from political funding?
I agree with you. Why was it allowed to happen? Because the government did something unprecedented in the history of democratic India. They snuck it into a finance bill and passed it amid the din and cacophony of an opposition and government disruption. I am bitterly opposed to parliament disruptions. I don't believe I was elected by my voters to go and sit and stand in the well of the house and shout slogans. But this has now become a key part of the culture, the parliamentary culture of India, that nobody has been able to stop. That's actually got worse with every passing year over the last 15, 20 years. And what has happened is because all parties subscribe to this culture of disruption, they have had a sort of gentleman's understanding not to exploit it too much by passing fundamentally important bills when everybody else is shouting and can't be heard. You know, if you happen to watch that, you may only see the camera tightly focused on the speaker and on the speaker with a small s and the bill passing. But you will, if there was a wide-angle view, you would see every other MP standing and sort of shouting and not hearing, and they can't hear in the din that the government is actually passing this bill. It's a travesty. A budget is meant to be discussed by the elected representatives of the people, often for 2 or 3 days, many, many hours of debate. Here there was no debate. It was just passed. And it was shocking and shameful that this is allowed to happen. I think it will certainly need to be revisited. We have absolutely no doubt that the BJP did it because they have a lot of foreign funds that they have tried to legitimize, money laundering by another name, but now it's legal. I really think we've seen and tolerated a lot of things from the very government that said, na khaunga, na khane dunga. We realize they only meant beef because when it comes to money, they have found so many creative ways of both khawing and, as far as their own people are concerned, you know, khane doing as well. But anyway, the answer to your question is we obviously will not support that. Secondly, as far as transparency is concerned, I'm very proud of the fact that I'm the first MP in India to ever publish every year an account of how I'm spending my MP funds and to give an annual report to my voters in print and on the internet of what I've done for them in the course of the year. I believe very much that democracy is not only about elections every 5 years. It's about what the elected representatives of the people do between elections and how they relate to the people who have entrusted them with their faith and their confidence. That's the way I've tried to conduct myself as an MP. And I hope that we, the voters of India, the citizens of India, will ensure that all future governments are held accountable, not just every 5 years, but every day. We have failed to hold this government accountable enough. You have a big opportunity coming up in March or April to do that, probably April. But once you've done it, I think then whoever wins the next 5 years, be on the ball. It's your democratic right to hold your government accountable to you for what they've promised they will do. No more paradoxical prime ministers.